Okay, good morning again. We're ready to start now with the second panel. This is going to be DPC Your Way, Take Back Control. Doctors Rebecca Bernard and Sharon McCoy-George. So I'm not sure which of you is teed up for slides first. Okay.
I think so.
All right, very good. Here we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming and being here and inviting me to speak about this important topic. And let me see if I know how to make this work. Actually, it looks like Sharon, you are teed up first. It says part 2. Is there any way we can change that, or do we want to go ahead and just invert the order? I'm pushing buttons, nothing's happening. Point to this?
Yeah. Is that doing it?
Nothing's happening. Sorry, guys.
Are we frozen?
Nothing's happening, but I could just use my iPhone and I could tell you the slides until we get them started. So we can backup plan, and hopefully somebody will help us from the department to. I'm pushing the little.
At the previous session, at some point it will be 50 slides ahead of you.
I'm sure it will be. Well, Sharon, do you want to just switch off?
Can we just go?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to. It looks like we're going to have a trade-off, and Dr. George is going to start us out, and then we'll invert the order. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Sharon George. Nice to be here. 2 years ago, I think, when the first Nuts and Bolts conference was, is Lee in the room? Right now, when the brochure came out, and it was kind of all white men on the panel, and I sent him a message and I said, that's not a very diverse panel. And so we're really happy to be here. I don't have any disclosures. These are our learning objectives. We're kind of going in reverse order because of the slides. Rebecca's going to talk about using psychology for personal wellness. We're both going to kind of talk about challenges facing women in DPC. And then I'm going to talk about practice design to fit your life. How many people here are already doing a DPC? Okay. So this was me in medical school. My husband and I went to medical school together. We did a rotation. Our primary care rotation was in Wales with the GP in Wales, who's the guy in the middle there. He was one of these doctors who did everything, right? He took out gallbladders. He did the anesthesia for C-sections. He delivered babies. He put tubes in kids' ears. He was an incredibly wonderful family doctor or GP. And he knew I wanted to go into primary care or family medicine, and he would always say, Sharon, isn't there something else you can do? And he was saying it in this really, Welsh, funny way, like, this is going to take over your whole life, but if this is what gives your life meaning, then do it. And I see that the same way for DPC. If you have a great job in a great practice where you can take care of patients the way you want to, and have time for the rest of your life the way you want to, and you're getting paid what you need to do what you want to do in your life, and you get to take care of the patients you want to take care of, don't quit your job. I mean, I think the reason to do it is because one of those things isn't true, right? So most of you guys, it seems like are already doing a practice, so you know that. So one of the things I wanted to say is I love some of Brene Brown's work, and she took from Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And what Brene adds to that is own the fear, find the cave, write the new ending for yourself, for the people you're meant to serve and support, and for your culture. Choose courage over comfort, choose whole hearts over armor, and choose the great adventure of being brave and afraid at the same time. And I think that's when you own a business and you're running your DPC, that's what you're doing. So for me, the reason I wanted to do a DPC or membership practice was I believe in the healing value of long-term relationships with patients. it wasn't to get rich or, to form a network and have a huge empire. I wanted relationships with patients, and I think that's what this model really can give you. I also believe that primary care lowers the cost of the system, but when primary care, as most of it is in this country now, is owned by big health systems, there's no incentive to really promote good primary care, because good primary care will order less MRIs, order less specialty consults, all that, and the big systems need that to survive. And so there's kind of these mixed motives, I think. And so doing it independently is a really helpful way to do it. You guys know that. And I believe that we need supportive communities, because you're out there by yourself. So this was my family, kind of in the middle. I started my practice in 2006. So my kids were in 4th grade and 7th grade. So that direct primary care wasn't a word yet. It was just, so I did a membership, I called it a membership practice, or a relationship-based practice. And so we were making it up. There weren't other people that had done it so much. There were a few concierge practices, and a few people were starting to do things. We ended up forming the Ideal Medical Practice movement, which a lot of people in that movement were doing insurance billing, but a few of us were doing membership models. So I had practiced like 11 years or so before I started my practice. But I think the reason, somebody posted the other day in the DPC Facebook group, like, what finally kicked you off to say you wanted to do it? And I think for me was one of my kids was in a school play, and I had to give 6 months notice to have a morning off work. And I mean, you don't know that when the school play is going to be 6 months ahead of time, right? So I couldn't go, and I'm like, I'm not going to live my life like this. I'm just not going to. And then we ended up, my husband's an engineering professor, so we had a sabbatical year we spent in Italy, and they wouldn't give me a leave of absence for my job, so I had to quit and figure out what I was going to do, and that's what kind of kicked me into it. A lot of us get forced into it for something, but it is important to remember like why you're doing it and how awesome it is to not have to ask somebody for permission to go to an event at school that far ahead of time. So the flexible schedule for teaching, my family, and community involvement was really important to me. So this was my practice, Renaissance Family Medicine. I was open from 2006 to 2014 in this practice, and then I moved back to Missouri to take care of my mom, who was dying, and for my husband's job. It was a combination of membership fee and scholarship patients. Really low volume. I did a home office, so my practice was in my house. And I did house calls, often on a bicycle, which was really fun. I called it a relationship-based practice. It wasn't, to save money on meds. At the time, I had a few meds I give people for free, but mostly it was figuring out where you could get $5 or $4 at that time meds on, from Walmart or Target or whatever, and people could save the membership fee easily if they were on medicines, just by somebody sitting down and figuring out what they could get off of and then where they could get cheaper. So this was, I had a 13 by 13 room, so like 130 square feet. You don't need much, right? You don't need very much room. I'll go through this really fast. So I kind of had a negative overhead in a way, because by being able to deduct home expenses, instead of paying rent, I got to deduct a portion of my home, and a portion of our internet, a portion of our utilities, and all that. So I had part-time malpractice, no staff, a lot of these things you guys know. The scholarship patients, my daughter who was in 6th grade was really worried I was going to see everybody for free. And so I had to get my patients that were going to get a reduced rate approved by her. And so that's what I would say. I'd say, well, I have to talk to my manager, before I can. And one thing I learned in the patients that I would see for free or for a reduced rate, first of all, I think it's good to always charge something. Even if they're in a really difficult situation, if you're charging $5 or $10 a month, it's still a commitment. The people I saw for free really did take advantage, didn't value it as much. And then set a time limit. It's for 6 months. and maybe can be renewed, if they're depending on their situation. If you're charging really low rates, you don't need to do this. I was charging higher rates. And then, depending on what your goals and purposes are in life and your other support, if you can see more people as scholarship patients as you get the salary you need, then do that, or use that time for something else. I think you guys know a lot of ways you can do it without staff. I mean, online appointment scheduling for me was amazing. So many patients would wake up in the middle of the night, and if they could go online and schedule an appointment for the next day, they didn't need to wake me up. So those are kind of my highest goals, was the autonomy. I had a therapy dog in my office, gardening, and then I had a very educated population in that practice because we were in a university city, so we had a lot of faculty, graduate students, things like that, and then also a lot of other laborers, things like that. I was in Southern California. And definitely I had a dual screen where we could sit and look at UpToDate together, look at information together. And I really like having that time to do that with patients, and not being rushed. My practice before, for one, we still had paper charts before I started the practice. It was half paper, half electronic, kind of the worst of both worlds. And we never, half the time didn't have the chart when you go in the room. You're running late, not because of your fault, but because of all the patients you had to see. So I was constantly apologizing, and I just hated that, and I love having the time to spend with people. So the next stage of my life was, that's my mom, and my dad was a barber, which I think, I put that picture up there, it's my sister and her kids, but it's because he was a small business owner, and as I was growing up, he constantly told us, get a job with benefits, that's the thing to do. But I saw in him the pride he had in his, he was like the therapist for the town, really, as the barber. And I really saw the pride. We always cleaned the barbershop after church on Sunday. So we as a family, that was what we did. And so that small business ownership, I think, is kind of in my blood. And I did not realize how hard it would be to close my practice and move. These people became like my family, and they're still contacting me saying, are you coming back? Can you come back? But by moving, I think it was a good stage in my personal life to move and take care of my mom, and to be in the medical system in that way and see how really horribly patients are treated. Even in a decent, it wasn't a terrible hospital or terrible doctor at all, but just the amount of, people don't have time, and there's hospitalists that would come in and see her. We'd be in the hospital for over 24 hours. Nobody would have seen her. She's not getting her I'm sitting there going, we have to do something here. And, it really is a bad system that people are traumatized by. And so when we get them, when they come to us, they've been abused by the system. And, so I think that's part of the pushback people give. It takes a little while to develop that trust back. So the other thing we did when I moved back to St. Louis was, Washington University didn't have primary care, and so that's who hired my husband. They were like, oh, we want you to come and start primary care. So I had this vision, okay, I get to move back home, help take care of my mom, and bring, kind of DPC type primary care, to this university system. This is going to be incredible. And that didn't work out. They're a quaternary care system. They make a lot of money and do a lot of good by taking care of referral patients, and they really don't want to do primary care. And so I guess the lesson for me in that, it was really disappointing, but the lesson for me in that was, if something's not working, move on. I realized after not that long that I was beating my head against the wall, and they wanted to say they had primary care, but they really didn't want to have primary care, and so it was time to move on. The other thing I wanted to say regarding that is, if you're in a situation where you don't have control, if you're still in a practice, then it's even more important to do things like, I would go to the Botanical Garden in St. Louis, which is a wonderful botanical garden. If you're ever there, please go, and take oil painting classes and do things that were really fun for me, because I didn't have control at work. And the other thing that I learned during that time, this is from this quote, "The worst walls are never the ones you find in your way, they're the ones you put there. This is from this app. Does anybody use We Croak, this app? I learned about this. I need a sip of water. This is, if you've seen the happiness studies, Bhutan is the happiest country in the world. And they say it's because they meditate on death 5 times a day. They remind themselves that they're going to die. And so this is an app, it's like $1.99 or something, and it pops up on your screen 5 times a day, you're going to die. And the first time somebody told me this, I thought, okay, that's fine. And then I saw her again at a conference or something a year later, and she's like, did you get the app? Did you get the app? And I'm like, that's okay. And then finally, I saw her again this summer, and I downloaded the app, and it's actually really pretty incredible. When something's happening, whatever it is that's happening, and you just see that, it's like, okay, this doesn't really matter. What's important here? And so I just wanted to mention that. So we all like some of Steve Jobs' quotes, I think, in this group. And so this one was really relevant for that. Remembering you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You're already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart. So now we moved again because it didn't work out there after my mom passed away last summer. Had a great death. In her 90s, had a wonderful life. It was really nice to be able to be there for her and help her with that. Helping people have a good death is incredible. That was one of the things I learned from Dr. Kavanaugh in Wales, was he would joke that he had spent a year in the U.S. on a sabbatical, and he would always joke that we just don't do death well in this country because you don't get any rewards for it. And so he made up a death app, GAR, for us. He said, Americans need to get 10 out of 10. So if you die at home, you get 2 points. If you die without any tubes in you, you get 2 points. And it was a really good, so we'd go to these little cottages, and people would die at home, and that pneumonia was an old man's friend, right? And that's what my mom ended up dying. And the day she died, it was kind of this, she was ready to die. She'd been ready to die for a long time, and it's so hard for people to be okay with that. And so that was a really gift that I had, was like, this is good. It's time. She's ready to go. It's good. And so when we can offer that to our patients, I think it's incredible. I hadn't given up on the universities. So we moved back to California, Northern California, at UC Davis. I'm teaching in the family medicine residency. I thought, okay, if I'm in a place that is really good at family medicine, they'll be ready for direct primary care, which I haven't been finding is true, actually. It's really threatening to people that have been in the university system their whole careers. And so we'll see. I think I'm going to open practice this spring or summer. But we bought 5 acres in Napa, and I'm doing some physician retreats for the residents and interns. And Rebecca and I are going to do one this spring on this very topic together, and so we'd love to have some of you come. So that's what I wanted to talk about in the next part of my talk, is do you feel like you have a choice? No matter what you're doing, you do have a choice. And this, some of you saw that article that came out this year on moral injury in physicians. And I remember, how many of you have read or listened to the book, The Body Knows the Score, about trauma? It is a really good book. So I got it because I'd heard when I was in St. Louis, my practice was at a community health center. I thought, this is really good to learn everything that patients have, a lot of our patients have gone through. And I listened to it on tape like 3 times. It's a really long book. When I would go walking, all I could think was, this is what physicians have gone through, right? That's just, all the things of not having control, all that kind of stuff. So the new term, using the term moral injury, which is started at Syracuse University for veterans, and what happens to veterans, and kind of the difference between moral injury and PTSD, which I have on this slide. Which I think using moral injury for what a lot of us went through in our training or in our practices is really makes a lot of explains a lot of things, I think. So I can just let you look at those. It's a burden carried by people that have experienced some kind of trauma, and outsiders don't understand. So when you say, like, it's so hard being a physician these days, to people that aren't in medicine, I mean, most people think we are just like whining rich people, right? They don't understand that in primary care we're not rich, mostly, and how hard it can be. So this is kind of a little bit of maybe women or just people that listen, which I think people in DPC do. The first practice I joined when we moved to Southern California was this 40-person primary care group, and HMOs just hit. This was in 1995. HMOs had really hit Southern California, so we got paid $10 per member per month to do primary care, capitated primary care. And Dr. Brown, this isn't really him, but his office was like behind mine in the suite. And he could crank out, he would see patients like every 5 minutes and just give them antibiotics. And they'd always stop by my office or my podium and say, well, he doesn't have time, to answer my questions, but I knew you would. And so he was getting, credit for seeing all these patients, and I was answering all their questions. And I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that, right? This spring at the AAFP Physician Health Conference, there was a woman that was at one of the roundtables was telling me how horrible she felt because in her practice, which was like a 10-person practice, they posted the productivity charts like in the break room, and she was always at the bottom. And she was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm always the worst doctor. And then, I asked her what her patients were like, and she was taking care of all these patients that had, been abuse victims, were traumatized for whatever reasons. She was taking care of the really tough patients, and she felt like she was the worst doctor in the practice, which, clearly wasn't true. For me, I get this, I'm not allowed to talk to the residents about well-being, which is just hilarious, right? Like, how can we do this in family medicine? Okay. So I'm going to skip through some of this. This is just a little something that came from Howard Thurman. And he talks about how when you are under any kind of authoritarian regime, which feels like we are sometimes in medicine, if you go to the bottom, it kind of leads to spiritual death, but social reward. So you're at the top of the productivity chart, but you're not actually taking care of your patients. So I'll skip through some of this. This is the same thing that Paul talked about yesterday. And I just I'll go over this one and then let Rebecca talk. The concept of design, I really learned about my daughter when she was in graduate school. She studied design and computer, human experience, user experience in computer science, kind of combining psychology and computer science. And I started reading some of the books she had, and it's a really good way to look at medicine, I think, in that if things aren't working, it's not because somebody's doing something wrong, it's because the system isn't set up to get the results you want. And so I wanted to mention this book, Designing Your Life. It's a great book to look at. And one thing I wanted to challenge you to do on the way home is to just spend 20 minutes, no matter where you are in your life, thinking about your work view and your life view. If you spend hours and hours, it's not necessary and may actually get away from what's really in your heart. Just spend 20 minutes on each of these, writing what you want your work to look like in 5 years, no matter where you are. And the same with your life, and that's the way you're going to get there. I love this quote from Anne Lamott, in the end, we're all just walking each other home. And this is Milo, who's my therapy dog. In my practice, he was my therapy dog. And this is a quote from David White that I'm going to end on. All of us have the experience of looking back over our life where your younger self did something that your future self is very grateful for. You look back at that moment and say, if I hadn't gone out that door, if I hadn't made that phone call, if I hadn't made that promise, even if I had broken that promise, you'd have a very different life now than you had then. And now you can go back and say, from this weekend, what conversation would you begin? What promise can you make to yourself? What promise can you break that you had made before so that you can end up where you want to be as the ancestor of your future happiness? Come back to yourself and thank yourself for having stepped out on that path to the future of a better world for yourself and your patients, the world in which you can give your gifts.
Thank Rebecca.
What? See if we can get to your stuff. There we go.
I'm not a psychologist, but I play one in my office, like all of you do every single day. And so we're going to be talking about specific ways to use psychology to improve your life and your practice. I learned a lot about psychology because of my own personal journey, but also because of a tragedy that happened in our community a couple of years ago, which was a physician suicide that happened of a doctor who no one saw this coming from. He was always happy-go-lucky. He seemed like he had everything going for him. And when he took his life, it was devastating to us. So I became a member of a physician wellness committee, and the big mission that we had was to figure out how we could help doctors. And one of the ways we decided to do that was to pair physicians with psychologists, give them confidential, anonymous access to a psychologist so that they could talk about their stressors. Through that committee, I've developed a lot of knowledge about psychology, and I've realized how important and essential it is, and that there are specific tools that we can use every day in our practice to help ourselves and our patients. So first I want to tell you that psychology is real and it works. There are numerous studies that show that cognitive behavioral therapy makes a difference and improves outcomes. The reason is because by changing our perceptions or our cognitive distortions, which is just wrong thinking, incorrect thinking, we can actually improve our thinking and we can improve our behaviors. And what's even better is when we change the way we do things, we can actually change the people around us. And of course, the biggest reason for psychology is doctors need it. Sometimes people say, oh, do you go to a psychologist? And I say, do you know what I do all day? I mean, it's a tough job. And the other reason is that doctors, we have some issues maybe. Number one, we're perfectionists. We want everything to be perfect and just right. And when things go wrong, we don't deal with that very well. We fear making a mistake, we fear bad outcomes, but to be human is inevitably to fail, and that's going to happen. And when it happens, sometimes we have a hard time forgiving ourselves and letting go. Doctors are at higher rate for mental illness, particularly women physicians, medical students, and residents. Women physicians are at very high rate of divorce, and hey, get this, the more hours you work as a woman, the higher your risk of divorce. For men, it's the opposite. The more hours men work, the lower their divorce risk. I don't know why, I'm just pointing it out. And of course, we have a prescription drug abuse issue, and I think a lot of that has to do with us wanting to self-medicate. We don't always get the help that we need, and so that's why we're having to have this conversation. There's a big stigma to getting help, and again, that's why I stand up and talk about it. I think we all need to talk about it, and we need to make it more of a matter-of-fact statement. Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I learn the tools that would help me do better? And if you want to spin it this way, because my patients need to get the help and I'm not necessarily equipped to give them that. So the more I learn about psychology, the more I can provide that help to my patients. Just a quick word about physician suicide. It's real, it's still happening. Physicians are at a higher risk than the general population. Women physicians have a 2.3 times greater risk than the general population. And usually we don't see it coming because physicians hide the signs that they are developing or going down that pathway. The biggest reason that we think that physicians have high risk of suicide, there's many, but what happens is it starts as a cognitive distortion, it starts as illogical thinking, and then it develops into a persistent delusion, really, of thinking that there's no way out. we're hopeless, there's despair, and sometimes ending your life seems like the best choice. So the way to help prevent that is to acknowledge our emotions and deal with those cognitive distortions before they get to that point. And so we don't tend to deal with our emotions very well. Part of that has to do with the culture of medical training. I'm sure many of you in here heard, suck it up. You know, you're tired, you can sleep when you're dead. How many people heard that in residency? I know I did. We also learn to compartmentalize. How many of you have had to tell a patient that they're dying, they have cancer, some horrible, horrible thing, walk out of that room and into the next room and put a smile on your face, and then listen to the next patient, blather on about their rash or something, and you have to shut down that little part of your brain that's still thinking about that last person. So we learn how to do that as a coping technique, but if we don't eventually open up those little boxes where we put our emotions, they're festering and they're going to cause us problems down the road. And of course, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect. So if I were to acknowledge that I feel sad or afraid, then maybe that means that I'm not perfect, or I'm weak, or I'm a failure. The key to using psychology is all about your thinking, and there's not a lot in this world that we can control. In fact, I would probably say there's nothing we can control except our thinking. So we can learn how to change our thinking. Number one, just the simple ability to acknowledge your emotions is something that can make a huge change in your thinking. Whenever we're stuck in a powerful emotion, it engages our amygdala, which is the primitive part of our brain. So simply acknowledging or labeling an emotion actually makes you activate your frontal cortex, which is your human brain, and it shifts you from amygdala or primitive thought to more advanced thinking, and that actually can move you past a cognitive distortion. The technique of cognitive reframing, I'm sure you all know about that, and that is simply identifying that you're having a thought process that's incorrect or illogical. So first you have to realize it. Then you have to challenge the thought by asking yourself, is this thought real? Is there any truth behind it? Do I have any evidence to believe it? And if the answer is no, then you want to reframe that thought in a positive way. And that's something that's not easy to do. It takes practice and it takes effort. And sometimes your mind wants to keep taking you back to the bad thought, and you need to continuously give yourself the cognitive reframe over and over again until it becomes more the first thing that you think of instead of the negative thought. The biggest way that we can use cognitive reframing is in catastrophic thinking. So this says, you are about to catastrophize. Apply logic, yes or no. And I love to give my own example of catastrophizing because I'm a great catastrophizer. If I see a letter from an attorney come in the mail, it might be requesting records, but already I'm sued and I'm losing my job and I'm living on the streets. So some years ago, I was working for the system and I hated my job. It was an RVU factory. I had bought a house during the housing boom in Florida. I was underwater. I didn't have a great marriage, and I was feeling really in a dark place and in a lot of despair. I called my sister, and she lives in Oregon, and she's as type B as I'm type A. She's very free-spirited, and so I called her and I was crying and I said, I hate my job. And she said, quit. I can't quit my job because this house and I'm underwater. And she said, foreclose on your house. And I said, okay. She said, move out to Oregon with me. She's from Oregon, of course. Move to Oregon. Oregon's a great state. Move out and do locum tenens. And I said, but what about my marriage? And she said, divorce him. And she was right. And I did ultimately do those things, not necessarily in that order and not at that moment. But the simple engagement of my mind into realizing that I was not trapped, even though the idea of moving to Oregon and living with my hippie sister, and it was uncomfortable to think about, foreclosing, or I didn't foreclose. But, the idea of doing this, very uncomfortable, but I could have done those things. And when I realized that, it was very empowering. So when you're catastrophizing, the first thing you do is identify it and ask yourself, is there reason to believe this? And what are other reasonable alternatives? And one caveat on the divorce thing, if I have any single ladies in the house, prenup. please. We'll talk later. A few other psychology techniques that I want to get into. Mindfulness. Everyone's like, oh, mindfulness. But mindfulness is very powerful, and it can be very simple. So in this picture, the man's walking the dog, and the dog is looking at the trees and like, hey, beautiful day. And the man's like, oh my God, I got so many things to do. So mindfulness is simply being present in the moment, and it also is being aware of your own feelings and your own emotions. And studies of the brain have showed that if you do mindful meditation, 10 minutes twice a day for 6 weeks, you can actually change your brain circuitry. So mindfulness is something to think about involving in your day. Gratitude training, very simple technique of just writing down a few things that you're grateful for. Maybe some days it's just indoor plumbing, but if you're grateful for something and you're focusing on that, that actually improves your wellness. Journaling is a great way of sharing your emotions if you don't want to talk to other people, but it's even better if you can talk to someone else. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. It can be virtually, which is one of the great things now about Facebook and other sites. We can talk about our emotions. The Mayo Clinic did a study where they sent physicians to dinner with their colleagues, and they called it peer group processing, but I call it going to dinner with your friends. They found out that the doctors that did that, they actually had decreased burnout compared to physicians that did not participate in that program. I want to talk about setting boundaries and saying no. I've heard some 24/7 access thrown around here, and I said, no, I don't think so. To me, 24/7 access means you can text me and you can leave me a message, but if you're calling me at 3 in the morning, I'm going to tell you to go to the ER anyway, so maybe you just go ahead and go. We have to set boundaries in our lives. We have to learn how to say no. So here's the key. When you're going to say no or yes, understand your motivations. So before you answer quickly, why would I say yes or why would I say no? And it's difficult because we're all people pleasers. We want to say yes to everybody. We also need to remember that no is a complete sentence, and the longer you say, if you start to say and give reasons why, then people hear that and they realize that maybe they can convince you to say yes. So the answer can be very simple, no, and don't feel that you need to elaborate. It's going to be uncomfortable. So that's why you want to practice. This is, again, this mental imagery, this cognitive reframing. You're going to practice saying no and feeling okay about it. The patient's asking me for antibiotics and they don't need it, and okay, no, you're not. And you just practice the scenario in your mind and practice and see yourself feeling comfortable and confident, and imagine it going well. And the patient says, okay, doc, that sounds good. Maybe that's not going to happen, but you're going to imagine it is. And you're going to imagine yourself feeling confident and comfortable saying no. The more you practice, the easier it can get. It's really important that we control our schedules. Sometimes I see on Facebook some of the doctors say, I had a no-hitter day today. And I say, what the? A no-hitter means that no patients came in to see them. I don't get no-hitter days unless I make a no-hitter day, which I do. And I highly recommend that everyone do that. You need to schedule yourself time off. When else are you going to take care of your needs? Go to the dentist, go to the bank, go to the post office. So you need to schedule that. It could be a half day, but probably a whole day is better because a half day turns into a whole day as soon as you set foot in the office. So schedule that time off and make it non-negotiable. And also put into your schedule other activities that you want to do. It's important for us to have a support team. We need to have support at our office, but we also need to have support at home. It's really important for women, and I'll tell you why. Most men have a spouse who stays home. I'm sorry, it's true. These are statistics. 12% of men have a wife that works full-time, only 12%. In total, 30% work totally, and so the rest of them are working part-time. For women, their spouses, 95% are working full-time outside the home. That means that you guys both get home from work and you're tired, and where's dinner? Why isn't the house clean? Because somebody has to do that, and both of you guys were working. So that means that you need to get help, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. You can't do everything yourself, and you can't feel guilty about not being a superhero. You're just one person. even though we're superheroes in DPC, right, like in the picture, but in real life, we really are just humans. When you're talking with your partner and you're looking for support, it's really important to share your feelings. And it's hard because sometimes we want to shelter our partners, we don't always want to burden them, but they need to know what's going on in our minds, and they also need to be provided the opportunity to support us. It's also really important to define the roles and responsibilities that each person is going to take in the relationship, whether it comes to who's going to cook dinner, who's going to take care of the kids, but actually defining those roles and responsibilities has been shown to improve, particularly for women, their well-being. And we need to remember that we can ask for help, and when we get help from our partners, we need to accept that help, even if our partner isn't doing it exactly the way we would like it to be done. Maybe that's okay. We need to maybe not micromanage and learn to just be grateful and accept the help that's given. I'm going to transition now into psychology in the exam room, and I want to point out something. The time that you spend with your patients is not necessarily correlated with patient satisfaction. It's the perception of time. So if you spent 10 minutes with a patient or you spent an hour, it doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of the time, and the number one thing is that the patient needs to feel that they have been heard. So the way we do that, we're listening to our patients, but they don't always know that. So we have to learn how to show that we're listening. Fortunately, now that we're not tied to a horrible electronic record, we're not with our back to our patients, so we're able to do that, I think, better in DPC. So we need to do active listening, showing empathy. And remember that you don't always have to take action. Patients will bring you a laundry list, and you don't have to address all their problems. All you have to do is listen and make sure that the patient feels that they have been heard. I want to talk about the psychology technique of emotional mirroring and validation because it works amazingly. And I'll talk to you about different ways to employ this technique. Whenever your patient is giving you the laundry, let's say we know the whole scenario. A patient's telling you about their chest pain, which is serious, you think, and then after they're done with that, they say, oh, and by the way, my toe has been hurting too. So you might have actually helped and saved their life because you addressed their chest pain, but they may go away unsatisfied because that doctor didn't listen to me because you didn't address their toe pain. So here's how you fix that. They say, oh, but also, doctor, my toe has been hurting. You just do something called emotional mirroring, where you say, oh, your toe is hurting. And is that right? And then you clarify, and then you validate. You say, I understand that your toe's hurting, and that must be uncomfortable, and we're going to talk about that more next time. But what you just did was you showed them that you heard their complaint, you acknowledged their complaint, and you validated it. You don't have to do anything about it. You can do it next time, but you do need to at least acknowledge it, and that way the patient feels heard. It's particularly helpful in the difficult patient. This patient's wearing a t-shirt that says, I hate doctors. Sometimes it's not quite that obvious, but you know the signs when you walk into the room and you can tell it's going to be a challenging situation. We need to realize that patients who are highly emotional or situations that are difficult involve something called amygdala hijacking. And remember, I said that when you have a strong emotion, you're using your amygdala, and sometimes people get stuck in that amygdala hijack situation where they honestly cannot engage their frontal cortex. They are stuck. And there's a way to get them past that. At this point, this person is not responsive to commands or suggestions because they're just stuck in this primitive brain. So the way to get them past that is to help them feel understood. And you use emotional mirroring. So when you see someone and they're tapping their toe and they're furious, they appear to be very angry, you just identify the emotional state that you see and you state to the patient how you think they feel. You say, you seem very angry today, or you seem really stressed. And then you clarify, is that right? And if they say, yeah, I'm angry, I've been waiting for you for an hour. Okay. Then if they agree with you, then you validate them. And again, remember, you don't have to agree with them. You were waiting for an hour because I just told someone they have cancer, but they don't want to hear that. So instead, you're going to say, oh, you've been waiting for an hour. I would feel angry if I was waiting for an hour too. Just the simple validation of their emotions is usually enough to make them snap out of that amygdala hijack and engage their frontal cortex. Again, you're not telling them they're right to be angry, but you're empathizing and you're showing them that you understand how they feel. If you say, is that right? And they say, no, then you try to find out what's going on. They say, no, I'm just worried. You say, oh, you're worried. I can understand why you would be worried. So this is a very useful technique that can diffuse many situations. You don't want to try to problem solve a person who's stuck in amygdala hijack because it won't work. So that's why, when somebody says, if you try to tell somebody, please stop yelling, they'll say, I'm not yelling, because they don't even realize. So once you realize that the patient has moved past this, they'll usually sigh, and then they actually will start to solve their own problems once they've engaged their brain, their human brain, and not their primitive brain. It's important, this is particularly important for women and guys. Sometimes your eyes glaze over, but I think you need to realize that it's true. Women do see difficult patients a little more than guys because we attract more women, and women tend to bring more psychosocial issues to us. We, as women, spend more time on psychosocial issues. Not that guys don't do that. We do, and we respect what you do, but please realize that women's studies are showing that we're dealing with this on an even higher level, and that patients are more aggressive and demanding towards women physicians. It's just the reality. I want to say a word about dealing with sexism in the workplace, and this can actually also apply to any sort of inappropriate behavior. We must not ignore inappropriate comments or behaviors from our patients, from our colleagues, from our peers. But what's the right way to deal with it? It's actually something that we learn from psychology. It's acknowledging the comment in a calm manner, and that can be hard, and you may have to practice it. And when someone says something that's sexist to you, you just repeat it back. So we'll say, the person says, oh, doctor, you're looking hot today. I don't hear that. I'm just using that as an example. Not anymore. Then you would say back to them, you just said that I look hot today. And then you would say to them, it's not appropriate to talk to me that way. And then you continue on as if their comment had no emotional impact on you. That is the way that you take the power away from that comment. Now, it's going to be hard because when that happens to you, you're going to be shocked. But you shouldn't be shocked, ladies, because studies show that 70% of women are going to be sexually harassed in medicine. So from patients, from peers, from who knows who. So plan for it and just think it through and practice doing a scenario in your mind where you are responding in a calm way and you're in control and you're powerful. And after you have done this, everything goes fine. Because studies show also that when men are called out on their behavior, they actually kind of don't mind it, and they actually find that they have better relationships with the women that they interact with. Ending your visit on time. It's really important to let patients know how much time they have with you. I'm not a big fan of hour-long visits. I like to keep them to 30 minutes. I think the patients leave hour visits more exhausted than the doctor. So I like to do 30-minute visits. And I tell them in the beginning, hey, we have 30 minutes together today, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you. If they come late, oh, we have 15 minutes, so let's get started. And give them a 5-minute warning. And don't be afraid to be direct. In the last lecture, someone said, I've learned to be rude with my patients. It's not rude, it's just being direct. And it's always okay to say, I do want to hear more about that, and let's schedule a follow-up. This is just a cartoon that says, you're going to have to take an oath that you'll change your lifestyle. And it's something I wish that we could get patients to do, because so many times we feel that we're stuck with patients not making changes that we would like them to make, and it's stressful to us as physicians. But here's the thing, the doctor cannot be working harder than the patient. The patient is the one with the problem. But one thing that we can do is learn how to use motivational interviewing to help our patients make changes. Lectures don't work. Making people feel guilty doesn't work. What we can do instead is learn how to find out what the patient, what would motivate them to change. And this is a whole lecture in and of itself, and there are different courses online that you can even take to learn how to do motivational interviewing. It works amazingly well once you try to figure out what the patient wants to change. And don't take your work home. Someone said upstairs, it was really cute. She said, it's like if someone brings you their monkeys, you can pet the monkey, but don't take it home with you. I thought that was good. And then the key to, thank you, the key to treating difficult patients is frequent follow-up, because these patients fear abandonment. They've been abandoned many times because, you know, how they are. So when they know they're going to see you on a regular basis, they lose that fear and anxiety, and they actually can become better patients for you. Also, don't be afraid to work with a psychologist to learn how to manage these patients. On this slide it says, surprise, I invited a few friends over who think you should see a psychiatrist. And I say that the people that really need to seek mental health help, they won't go. And that's why the rest of us have to. You really should think about really working with a psychologist, and you can do it in a confidential, anonymous way if you can find a physician wellness program. Many county societies are creating them. Go off the grid and don't use insurance. Well, hello, that's what we do, right? Work with a colleague, but in a formal way, not in a curbsiding way. You want to have a real relationship. Or you can do what I do, which is I hired a psychologist to come into our office. She's actually a psychotherapist. Psychologist is actually a licensed term like medical doctor. I have a psychotherapist. She comes in once a week. I found her by putting an ad on Indeed.com. We pay her $50 a session with the patients. The patients pay $60, so we keep a little overhead. And the patients come to my office where they see her, and it's been life-changing for patients and for me, because I tell patients will say to me, well, why should I see a therapist? I have you. And I say, because I know this much and they know this much. And they've really made big changes in the way that they're doing with working with the therapist. And I know we covered a lot of territory in a short period, so if you want to learn more, shameless self-plug, I did write a book called Physician Wellness, The Rockstar Doctor's Guide. It's my sequel to How to Be a Rockstar Doctor. And I have some books here that I'll have for sale in the back. It's kind of by the registration area, but also it's available on Kindle as well if you're interested in learning more about how to use psychology. It's co-written with a psychologist. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.